We're in a world where you just use whatever the AI likes.
Yeah, I probably need to stop shitting on TypeScript so much, considering we are launching our TypeScript learning path here.
Well, I think today is really obvious that actually the best engineers are the best users of AI.
Today, I am joined on time for the, first time in a while. It's interesting interviewing people that are coming from businesses. They actually show up at the allotted time, which is pretty cool. Malta, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Okay, so you are the CTO of Vercel. I'm not getting your title wrong, am I?
That's right, yeah.
I've screwed that up before. I don't want to mess it up again. Super excited to have you on. We're going to chat about AI. We're going to chat about V0, which has a lot to do with AI, but also has something to do with infrastructure.
Do we have an AI counter in the top saying how many times we say AI in 30 minutes?
In an hour, and we might overflow, a 16-bit integer. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But let's just start there. So I've used Vercel. In fact, literally just this morning, we just made an acquisition of I Code This. It's Florin Pop's website for learning to code. And he was transferring me over his Vercel account. So I was in there messing around with stuff again. And the whole product idea behind V0 is very interesting to me because it's not something that I expected from Vercel. It's something that I expected from GitHub, right? It's something that I expected from SourceGraph. Vercel in my mind has always been basically an infrastructure product. Can you tell me, just starting from zero, why you guys decided to ship V0, and I guess what it is for our listeners who don't know?
Totally, yeah. So V0 is a tool where you put in a prompt and it will produce for you initially basically a design with the React code behind it. And these days, kind of a full stack app potentially connected to your backend that just implements that prompt. And you can be very basic, just make me a landing page, or you can say, here's my open API spec, and it will go and build you an entire CRUD app maintaining that API. It really kind of does this end-to-end app generation, but it's called V0 because it's not meant to do the whole thing that you live in prompt land forever, but kind of get you started. Because in my experience, it can often be very daunting to make that first step. And so starting with something that's maybe 70%, 80% there can be really fun and energizing. That's where it comes from. I think the origin of the products were really that when ChatGPT came out, you realize, okay, you can prompt these things. They're good at text. They should be able to make HTML. That's not a crazy idea, right? Lots of people were cooking on that. So we were just trying it out. And I think we, as everyone else, realized it doesn't really work all that well. Nowadays, you could do this, right? But ChatGPT 3.5 wasn't quite as good. I literally remember someone in the room was raising their hands hey, oh my God, I figured it out. What they figured out is that there's this CSS adjacent technology called Tailwind, which is all inline. And it's just old enough to be in the old ChatGPT knowledge cutoff, so it knew about it.
Actually slurped
and because
up
it's inline,
yeah.
The LLM doesn't have to reason about, I write the CSS, now I write the HTML, it's all far apart, I forget about things. So instead, it does it all at once, and it does an incredible job. And so that's how we went from okay, we have nothing to we now have something that actually does a decent job, and we can go from there.
I'm really glad that we got to this part of the discussion, which is basically what the technical challenges were, because I've ran into this exact same problem where I have had incredible success with LLMs of honestly all the models, 4.0, anything from Anthropic, even the newer reasoning models. And the idea of proximity of where the logic lives is the biggest barrier to me using these tools for anything more effective than just spitting out a function.
That's right.
And I can see how the problem of okay, I've got an HTML file and a CSS file. They need to cross-reference each other a lot. As much as we like to think that HTML and CSS are decoupled, I'm very much on kind of the camp that they're kind of not really, though. Your CSS actually does care a lot about how the nesting of the HTML elements is and all that sort of stuff. So, okay, it's really interesting to hear you say that Tailwind kind of solved that problem for you, again, because all of the styles are inlined with the HTML. But that doesn't solve the JavaScript problem. I'm guessing that was still a big problem.
Yeah, and initially we actually didn't do any JavaScript. And then just as the models got better, we added JavaScript capability. So these days it's not these days it usually, maybe that's even overstating it. I would say it's roughly more than half the time naturally actually does a good job. If your product does roughly more than half the time a good job, that is horrible. And so what the V0 team, the way you have to understand their day job is they're just grinding categories of errors. This is actually really interesting because this is a bit of a adjacent thing, but you actually automatically kind of create great evals through that, because if you can auto fix certain things, you can also measure your model version X to no longer need those auto fixes. But like for now, basically, they basically say, okay, oh, the model like fantasizes module names.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to write a system that knows all the module names. I'm going to detect the error, then ask the LLM, well, this one doesn't exist. Here are at a distance away names, like pick one. So now you have maybe 5% of errors cut out, right? And so that's kind of how the team kind of grinds on getting the success rate up over kind of the baseline capabilities.
So is the process, I've used V0, granted it's been a few months, so I'm sure it's changed a lot. Is the implementation of V0 very, I don't know if this is a word, agentic? Agents? Like you said, spit out an app, try to execute it, look at the errors, take the errors, go again. Like I'm assuming it's not a one-shot prompt.
I think the extreme version of that is Devin, which some of the listeners might know, which is truly agentic. And you basically give it a task and it will just go figure it out, find errors, fix them, and really like it sends you an email when it's done, right? Like it's measured in like often hours. V0 is very much an interactive tool in the sense that it's supposed to do something reasonable, like in the session that you're actually using it. And so when V0 detects a problem, it will kind of fix it in an interactive manner, but it will only ever do things that are doable within like a time frame that humans perceive as, okay, I can actually wait for this because there's value. It would have been faster. Like it needs to fix errors faster than I could have done it myself, really. It's the way to use it. But yeah, it's certainly like it's under, ultra active development. So it's worth trying it every 2 weeks or so because it really does get better over time quite a bit.
First of all, are you able to tell me what base model you guys are using?
It's actually a really difficult question to answer, because it's not just one, and we're doing fine tuning and distillation and so forth.
Which
but
base
I think
models? Because we're using multiple at boot dev, and we're doing a similar
basically
thing, but
everyone loves the vibes of Claude, right? And in a similar fashion, like we're definitely using it, but it's also kind of not very fast. And so so we're basically trying to be really smart which model to use when. And it also depends on whether some questions to V0 might be actually information seeking. Some might be seeking what we have been discussing so far, which is to generate applications. And so you don't actually want to use necessarily the same model for both. Even if like the best model would do a good job, it might be better to use something like Gemini 2 Flash, which, has incredible performance and incredible cost for the same reason, really. And
incredibly low cost,
is
right?
Pretty low cost, yeah. Like the low cost is because it's fast, right? And the fast is great because you don't have to wait for the answers long. And so if you don't need the super expensive model, then it's actually better to go to the fast one.
Are there any of the big model? Well, okay, let me tell you like how we are doing some stuff in our code base. So we have this chatbot Boots on the boot dev site. It's nothing as agentic or complex as what you're doing with V0. He's a coding mentor. So he's given a lot of context around like where the student's at in the curriculum, what lesson they're working on. And we switch between a few models in the back end. Claude Sonnet, GPT-4o. We're testing Gemini Flash as well. And we just kind of test them out and get feedback from users, like thumbs up, thumbs down kind of stuff. Try to see which models people are liking the best. Are there any big models that you guys haven't tested yet with V0? Or are you pretty much jumping on them as soon as they come out to see how they work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth highlighting that one of the core principles of Vercel, because you asked initially, like, why do you build V0? Like, one of the reasons we built V0 is also that we make a framework for building AI applications called AI SDK. And we need an application that is using it so we can validate that it's good. And one of the features of AI SDK is it makes it really easy to switch out the model. We have basically a mechanism where we can, as a super user, have a feature flag that I can override with the model that I want to use the product with. And so I can very, very easily try out like different versions of the product.
Does AI SDK have a Golang SDK?
No, it's TypeScript. Yeah.
What are we doing here, Malte? What are we TypeScript only?
Yeah, I think it's really meant to build AI applications, right? And TypeScript's a good language to do like the glue that ties the front end to your back end.
It's a language.
If you're like React adjacent, it's a good place.
I need you to launch the Go one so that I can use
we love Go
because we're building our own.
I should say, if you want to nail it down, Vercel is a Go application. The serving systems that if you go to like any domain on Vercel, the first box that will handle that traffic is a Go service. And then it goes
You guys
through,
are Go on the back end?
Backend is such a like complicated word, right? We're Go on our serving systems. So the entire basically serving pass for user-facing traffic is Go. Our control plane and our business logic in the broadest sense is TypeScript.
Yeah, I kind of understand. I mean, I don't know your infrastructure deep enough to fully understand, but I kind of understand what you're saying. There's some part of your backend system that's written in Go. Is like the fundamental thing.
Like
here, right?
the vast majority of our like instances that we run are running Go services because everything kind of has to be fast.
Yeah, I probably need to stop shitting on TypeScript so much, considering we are launching our TypeScript learning path here in the next couple of months. Up until this point, we've just been like, it's Go or nothing on boot dev. We have finally capitulated and decided to ship JavaScript and TypeScript stuff. So it's coming. And then V0, just for all of our listeners, it's for generating front-end applications, right?
Right.
HTML, CSS, TypeScript. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's just TypeScript and just React at the moment, right?
You know, if you really make it will do other things, but it's really for that. Right?
Yeah.
I was doing a customer service rotation yesterday, and someone was complaining that their Swift project didn't work. It was actually like some zip download was broken. It was like actually a bug. We fixed it. But yeah, so clearly people are doing other things. Yeah. That's not what it's for, right? It's just as good at whatever the base model would be for that. But yeah, it's really tuned to help with also specifically Next.js questions and to build Next.js applications. You can upload Figma files if you actually have a designer, right? But you don't do the hard work of turning it into HTML. It gives you an application that is like the V0 of your application.
Yeah. So just next, I was pretty sure that was the case. And then also for UI, well, you said it supports Tailwind. ShadCN is built on top of Tailwind, right?
Right. It will default to ShadCN. We're in a world where you just use whatever the AI likes. I think almost there's no debates anymore because the cost of changing is now so low. The thing will like support other CSS things, but we're like very focusing because again, like the main issue in this space is that the quality as in reliability isn't great. And so you're really in a kind of constraints is liberating phase where we're really trying to be really good at the happy path. Obviously, if you come and say, well, I really like Material UI or whatever, like it'll do it. LMs are not good at saying no. But if you just say, well, I just want this to look good, which is the normal user, then it will kind of go and just give you something that looks good with a preferred tech stack.
From a business perspective, I'm like completely with you in the sense that we've done the exact same thing at boot dev. It's like, you want to learn backend development? Great. That's what we do. You want to learn it in Python and Go? Cool. Those are your only options on boot dev. We are starting to branch out a little bit, but like, I do believe in this idea of like, we're going to take the path that we think is best for learning the stuff, which actually we think that, you know, Go is best for learning the conceptual building blocks of the backend stuff that we're trying to teach. Not that it has to be exclusive again. That's why we're shipping TypeScript right now. But this idea of like, okay, in the age of AI, you do what's easy for the AI. I have to think about that for a second. First of all, I will just say, like, we use Tailwind at boot dev. Love Tailwind. Big fan of Tailwind. I think Tailwind's easy for humans. And the fact that it's easy for AI
for the same
like
reason,
nice
right? Like,
yeah,
it's like the cognitive overhead reduction that helps the AI also helps the human.
I've had guests on before. I had Natalie from the Go Time FN podcast on a while ago, and she's given talks about how Go is actually great for AI. Again, similar reasons. Like, it's just a very straightforward language, no backwards incompatible changes really. Like, LLMs just have a really easy time spitting out Go code that actually works. And yes, this idea of like building stuff that the AI likes makes sense. I do want to push back pretty hard though on the idea of ShadCN. So ShadCN UI, beautiful UI, built on top of Tailwind. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's very much like old school Bootstrap in the sense that it is opinionated about the style, right? So it's like everyone generating ShadCN apps, like their apps will all kind of look and feel very, very similar. Is that correct?
That's actually not correct at all for two reasons.
Okay.
It does have a built-in theming technology, which allows you to actually very heavily kind of horizontally like customize the way things look. There's just a default. There's a default look that looks great. There's actually themes. If you go to a website
maybe that's
that
what I'm
are
thinking
like
of.
that also look good, but like are completely different. And then you can make your own theme. I think the big idea of ShadCN, which in itself, I don't want to get too front end nerdy here, right? But, you know, I'm pretty old. I learned programming on Smalltalk 80. Back in the day already, there was this idea of component libraries for front end, right? And then we've been basically for now over 40 years iterating on this, and nothing ever hit the mark, because on a UI library, you can be only in two modes. You're either not configurable enough, and always someone will have some requirement that is not implementable, or B, you are so insanely configurable that everything's difficult. The big idea of ShadCN was, I will just give you the freaking source code. You can't even install it, right? Like it comes with a CLI and it copies the whole implementation of the front-end library into your project. It gives you the best of both worlds, because the CLI can update all the implementations like a library. But if you say, well, your theming support isn't good enough for me, and I need to tweak this thing because it's really important for my design system, you can absolutely do it, because you just have literally the source code committed to your Git repository. And so you have total freedom. And especially in the age of AI, where like the cost of having that source code kind of goes down because you now have tools that manage it, I think it's a really good compromise. But it is it's a novel take. But like basically, we've really been trying to do this for like decades, and nothing has hit the mark. And I think that's why it's so successful, because it's hitting the mark. It's easy to use, and you can do whatever you want if you really need to.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, I need to actually use it before I opine any more on it. My impression of it, having seen like websites and stuff, was like, oh, okay, it's theming on top of Tailwind. Apparently that's incorrect. Really interesting that it ships the source. That almost sounds to me, okay, maybe I do have to dig into this a little bit more, because I do feel like the reason V0 in particular is maybe particularly interesting to backend developers is for exactly the reason you said at the outset, which is I'm a backend developer. I love working with databases and business logic, infrastructure. Give me a form, right? Give me the form that I can load in the browser. And like, that's kind of what V0 is designed to do. When you say you get the source code of ShadCN, that sounds to me like tech debt immediately, in the sense of like, oh, great, I have like a copy of the source and now I'm going to change it, and I've immediately forked from any upstream changes. Is that not the case?
It's the case, but because it comes with a CLI that actually does the upgrades, tech dev is fine in the sense that as long as you know it exists, right?
Yeah.
Like you're making
just
you're
like
making
regular dev, it can be good.
Right, exactly, right? And so because it gives you a CLI, it does manage the upgrades automatically. And obviously you can fork, but you fork at a very minimal level. And also like it's like pull down menus. Like it's not rocket science. It's fully okay to be forked, and you fork it in this like subtle way. So like in the next project, really, maybe you're not forked, but it's still the same API, so you kind of know what's going on. In practice, like we've been using it for a while, obviously, it turns out to be a really good compromise, but it's not an intuitively obvious good compromise. It's one that you have to kind of try out.
And I will. There's more there than I originally thought. I need to go check it out. I thought it was just a theme on top of Tailwind. And by the way, I will say, like, again, I think Tailwind is a very good layer of abstraction. I think Adam and team did a really good job figuring out kind of where to draw the line. And I kind of wish, again, haven't checked out ShadCN yet, if the line of abstraction was just drawn at Tailwind, I feel like I might be in there generating some new dev UI.
One thing I want to admit is I'm not a CSS expert, right? So if you were and you were like arguing me, whatever, I like this CSS framework, I like Tailwind, I could not win that argument against you. So in a way, that's also like, that's why I love V0 so much, because first of all, if someone gives me a Figma file, my brain, it just shuts down, right? Let's say I'm a web framework developer. That's really what I am, right? I build framework. I listen to application developers what they want, and I can think that through and give them APIs, right? That's what I do. I'm not a web front developer, so I cannot take the Figma file and make HTML. I can tweak the CSS after, right? So like the fact that I can just drop that Figma file into V0 is super empowering to me. And similarly, I build like tools all the time. Again, it's the same thing. Like they used to look, Times New Roman and default input fields. And now like I get something that's beautiful, that's done faster than I could have done the ugly version myself. And so that's just really nice. And I think this kind of verticalization of my role, obviously I like it, but also if you think about what that does to companies, you need the experts, but you need them for the expert stuff. You don't need to like do the basics. You don't need to like communicate with a different human, which always involves process and like, I don't know, tickets, backlogs, all that type of stuff for stuff that can be handled by AI. And I think that's really empowering that I can just do more as a person.
Okay, I want to circle back to the verticalization thing. I think that's going to be really interesting. But before we do that, I don't want to let this go because you said something else that I thought was very fascinating, which was you said something to the tune of, in the age of AI, I don't think you used the word tech debt in this part of what you were saying, but like basically the proliferation of the amount of code that you have to manage, however many developers you have available on the project, is less costly now because you have AI tools at your disposal. I immediately agree in one sense. It's like, okay, when you give someone a new tool, in the worst case, it's a distraction. In the best case, it adds productivity. To me, I would argue, I've integrated a lot of AI stuff into our workflows at Boot Dev, definitely adding productivity in the majority of cases. Has sent me down some rabbit holes, but it does generally, I would be very upset if I didn't have access to LLMs anymore. Like it would be very harmful to my productivity. But I'm wondering if it's true that like an individual developer can handle a larger amount of code due to having extra tools at their disposal. And by the way, like that's already like been true in the past, right? Like you imagine like what one single developer could handle in like a world of assembly or C versus like what someone can get done with a higher level framework. It's like we've already seen that that's true. When you give people tools, they can get more done. My worry about like the actual lines of code checked into a repository ballooning is I wonder if the speed at which LLMs are particularly good at V0 type stuff, like generating boilerplate, generating net new things. They're disproportionately good at that maybe versus maintaining all of that stuff after you've made it. And I don't have the answer to whether that's true or not yet, but it seems like there's a decent chance that it is.
Yeah, and I just 100% agree with you. There's a concern, and maybe I'm living a little bit in the future, but I think it's also very clear that some of the properties that make it good at new stuff will also help with the existing code base in the long term. I think one thing that we're also investing in a lot is kind of the general notion of migration and how LLMs can be helpful in that. And I think there is just the potential in LLMs to really help with this. One thing LLMs have as properties that's really helpful is they don't forget learnings. Humans are really like as a backend engineer, you have incidents, right? And if you're really good, you have postmortems and you learn from them. But it still happens that the same incident or something similar happens again 2 years later, and you don't immediately remember that you've seen this pattern before, right? And again, like LLMs, they're great at this. They're great at this type of recall, and they're completely fearless. So they don't fear making changes, which can be problematic, right? But
I was going to say that. I don't know if that's good. Okay.
Yeah, humans have sometimes inhibitions of a certain type. Mostly, I should be clear because I agree that obviously all these things are not necessarily good. There's always trade-offs, right? But they have no fear in applying things into difficult domains. Like if I have to learn something new as a developer, I'm less skilled in a new thing, and they're just not like that. They're like more equally skilled. Right. And so there's certain things there where they're good, but also the workflows aren't there. But I can definitely envision a future where like just from a pure, I didn't want the human in the loop. It's really necessary where we get tools that are good at certain maintenance workflows and really help in a way that getting us to a new productivity level. But also to make maybe one point, because people are like afraid of like, oh my God, we're going to lose all our jobs. Yes, it's easier to write code, but yeah, that code needs to be maintained. That's not gonna, there's a lot of work, right? We're producing a lot of work. That more software is getting written. It's worth it to write it because it used to be prohibitively expensive to do it. Now it's not. It still equilibrates to the same amount of work in the end, or even more, because now there's more productivity, and so your own worth is more than it was before.
Yeah, and again, I want to hear your take on this because my listeners have heard my take on it, but in my experience so far, we've been hiring here at Boot Dev over the last year. We went from 2 developers just like a year and a half ago to 6 of us. All through that, of course, like the progression of AI has not stopped, the march of new model after new model. And even though I'm giving pushback here because I want the conversation to be interesting, I am very much not an AI Luddite. We use a lot of AI stuff at Boot Dev, and I think it's going to change, and it has been changing, it will continue to change how we write code. I want to understand the why behind V0 again, because at the very beginning of the podcast, I had asked, this is something that I expect from a company like GitHub or SourceGraph, like a company that's really focused on like, developer experience of not just like at the IDE level, I guess is the way I'd put it, right? Like Cursor. Why V0 for Vercel? And does it have something to do with what you've been alluding to, this like verticalization of roles?
I would say, no, it does not have to do with verticalization of roles, because that is something we discovered in the best sense of that way, right? Like sometimes you have product market fit beyond what you originally planned. In itself, at the core, Vercel is a framework company. We make Next.js and we built an infrastructure platform to host those applications. And
did Vercel start with Next? I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is important, at least for me to understand. Did Vercel start with Next and then build infra, or was it the other way around?
It started with Next, but the infra came very quickly. And the core inside, which is a tangent, but I think important, the core inside of the company was what we call framework-defined infrastructure. So rather than writing Terraform files or rather than writing some kind of description of infrastructure primitive that exists in Vercel's system, you just write your app in the framework of your choice, and we analyze the primitives of your framework. Initially it was only Next, now we support 35 different ones. And we say, okay, this is how you define a route in your framework. This is how you define a route that needs compute at runtime. Okay, now I need to deploy some kind of function to our system that can actually execute that code, right? And so we derive the infrastructure that you need from the code that you wrote. Even our largest customers, you can like go to their code bases, you grep for Vercel, and it would just not have a hit. All we told them was read the documentation of your framework. We also don't have a local development environment because you just, run whatever your framework says, and then you deploy to us, throw over the fence, and we'll run it for you. We make a new virtual infrastructure for every single commit. So we have immutable deployments in that way. You can like binary search all your deployments you ever made, which is incredible if you have a bug. And, there's some caveats there. We can like deep dive in that forever. Also, like, since this is a backend focused podcast, this is a type of infrastructure provisioning that works incredibly well for front-end applications.
I was going to say, all of our issues ran in... Yeah, exactly. It's like, the minute we added our database to the pull request environments, it's like, well, shit. Exactly. Now we need to do something else. Yeah.
I mean, obviously with Neon data branching and stuff, it's like needs some solution to this, but that doesn't work for prod. And Vercel's approach even works for production, right? And then so far, because we essentially acknowledge database exists, but they're outside of our deployment system, right? So it's a separate problem. That's what the company is, right? But the company is a developer experience company. We work on Next.js. We obsess on stuff like, hot code module replacement for like iteration speed while you're developing. We obsess about the build speeds, deployment speeds. And so having a tool that just overall makes the workflow faster was kind of an obvious addition. But the original customer was just our customer who's a front-end developer, and we wanted to make their life a little bit easier. I mean, that continues to be a good user base for a tool like V0, but on the other hand, V0 has adoption in a much broader market. And so there's definitely the backend developers who now can ship full stack apps. There are the designers who can, even if that code never gets used, can make a plug in their Figma, and then they get an HTML page and they can test it on a real device and all that stuff. And there are, people who learn, who have an experience that's almost maybe like web development learning was in the 90s, where you could look at the HTML of any given page and it kind of made sense. And similar as V0, right? Where it gives you idiomatic source code that you can understand, but you don't yet understand it. you're in the learning process. So I think which is really powerful. And that's obviously an incredible large market compared to the Next.js developer, where I think there's 1.7 of them. There are 1.7 million of them, right? And there's many other, engineers that kind of go beyond that small audience.
Yeah. I mean, I can attest to how useful LLMs are for learning. I mean, that's what boot dev is. When we added the Boots chatbot, we started pre-GPT-4 release, but people chat with Boots 4 to 5 times more than they look at a solution.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Like you said, being able to have the AI push back on your code and say, hey, that's not necessarily the best way to do it. Here's a different way to do it. And have it be very directionally correct. Occasionally it will hallucinate things, right? But sure. I think that most people, even if you're not a domain expert yet, I do think that there's a skill to it that needs to come. And again, that's why boot dev isn't literally just a chat bot for you to learn how to code, but it's you kind of learn, just like in the early days of the internet, you kind of learned what a spammy site looks like. You kind of start to learn what a hallucination looks like. You kind of start to learn when a response comes back, whether you should go citation needed on this.
And it's too good to be true. kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really interesting to see what happens to this generation of developers who grew up with the existence of these tools. What I think today is really obvious that actually the best engineers are the best users of AI. Like the better you are at recognizing when it does something wrong. The similar thing, like I was talking about verticalization around going from backend to front end. There's also the like horizontalization. So it happens in V0, but obviously as a front end tool because that's what it's for, right? So I mentioned AI is fearless. It has zero fear from like matrix math. So it will give you 3D animations. And lots of front end engineers have no idea how to do that stuff. It will generate shaders and all this stuff, right? It's not afraid. And similarly, like let's say I'm a Go developer, but I don't know Rust, but I'm like an advanced like staff engineer. It generates Rust and I can kind of tell where it gets wrong and it's really, really helpful to me. That I have this like assistant that helps me do things and goes so much faster than I could have done it from first principles, like reading the book. And so I think that's like a proven thing. It's definitely exciting and scary to see what happens to the next generation.
I use it as a correctness checker in the sense that, so like I'll write a script for a video that's like highly technical, going over a bunch of different points. I really try when we make these they're like 4 to 5 minute explainer videos to not have any errors in my video because I don't like re-recording them, right? You get a number wrong, you mistype a symbol. Maybe I literally just like misspoke and now the concept is technically inaccurate. Having someone like read over all that stuff is like pretty expensive, both in terms of their time and in terms of their expertise. So while the AI isn't perfect, I have started feeding all my scripts through the AI after I write them and just like point out anything that looks like it might be off. And it's caught a few things. That doesn't mean that after I do it, I have 100% confidence that it is accurate, but it is catching stuff.
And that's what I meant with like, it being like relentless, right? Because humans also suck at this, especially if you find the human who's actually technically good, but they're not the best editor in the world. Certainly AI excels at like also being, always
they
on.
won't LGTM your pull request because they just didn't want to read it, right?
Exactly.
Or I should say the bot won't do that. So where did the learning come about? Well, explain verticalization of roles, because we've used that term a couple times. I don't think, people maybe caught what that was.
What I mean with verticalization of roles is that I, as a developer or even as a designer, or as a PM, or as a program manager, whatever you have, right? I think I'm an expert in some role. And in the traditional process, I have a team of experts and work kind of goes from person to person. Now, there was already this notion of the full stack developer, which was always, I think, a bit of a problematic word. But what it really means, I think, in practice is that maybe I'm an expert at backend, but I'm also doing front end. Or I'm a front end developer, but I'm not afraid of the database. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm probably more expert in like one of these things, but I'm also not full stack. I'm probably like not a security expert. Right. And I don't know, people have some kind of common joint understanding of what it actually means. I think what AI basically does here, and V0 with the respect to like helping you with front end, is that it turns you into a full stack engineer. Very concretely speaking, right? If you're super hats down backend engineer, it will just do the front end work for you. And it does enough of it that you're probably capable of then putting it to the finish line. That's obviously great as an engineer to now be able to like just do more complete things. But it also means that in my team, I just don't need to involve the other experts as much, which means these experts can now focus on the actually hard tasks. Because maybe I do run into some limitation where I can't quite do it with the AI, but I got 80% there. The thing is also obviously true for them if they have a tool that helps them with the backend aspect of the work and so forth. So I think like from a pure productivity point of view, every time you switch from person to person or even team to team, like if you have a backend team and a front end team and they're like organizationally separate, that introduces friction and reduces company-wide productivity. And so if you have a tool that reduces the need to do that, you can get productivity gains that are substantial. And they're substantial in the sense that Cursor, which I use, which is amazing, Cursor makes me somewhere between 10% and 200% more effective, depending on how good Cursor is on the given day, right? It's really, really helpful, but it doesn't change anything about what I do. I'm just faster at what I've done, right? I get more tickets done per day. But it doesn't change anything about what I do. Whereas when a tool can turn me into a full stack engineer, my work product is now a different one, right? And I think that can be transformative for what a company can get done in any given moment in a way that I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it changes the types of projects you'd even think about tackling as an organization.
Right, exactly.
There's a difference between how long something takes and like whether or not we even have the in-house expertise to think about it.
I can give you even examples outside of engineering. Like we have like SDR, that's like sales development representative. It's like the most junior rank on the sales ladder of jobs. And these folks now build tools for themselves. I think that's really exciting. And these tools are also, because it's not a no-code tool. So it has you learn something along the way versus kind of the no-code things, which are like where you get stuck in the abstraction. So I think it's like really tangibly happening, where like you can just get more done and you do things that previously just would have never been prioritized because you were saying like, yeah, this is just not worth it given the amount of effort that we have to put in, and the maybe also like organizational credit, right? Where you have to convince them to do things.
It's so much cooler in my mind and so much more productive and honestly more fun to give, I'm just gonna use the example of like a data analyst, to give a data analyst like read-only access to a database, fundamental knowledge of SQL and an LLM to figure out how to get what they want out of the database, versus like either A, giving them like an engineering resource that they have to like talk to in order to figure out how to get what they want out of the database. And in fact, a data analyst was the wrong example. Let me back that up. Give like a finance professional access to a read-only database, basic understanding of SQL and an LLM, because they're going to learn 100%. SQL as they go, and they're going to be able to do literally everything. Whereas if you just gave them like a point and click no-code tool on top of the database, they'd naturally be restricted. If they want to do something that the no-code tool didn't support, they'd have to contact a developer or something.
Yeah, totally. I already mentioned that I literally yesterday did a rotation on our support team. And so these are like, they're technical folks, right? We have like an admin tool where you can, that allows you to inspect kind of the entities of our system. Like I was just thinking it would be incredible if V0 was almost integrated into the admin tool. And it was aware of certainly the read-only APIs, and you could basically say, here's the case I want to solve, build me a tool that allows me to dig kind of deep on that problem space. I could really envision that would actually just work. And what happens on the other hand is that you, I think, get into tools that obviously optimize for things that people have to do every day, but then the other way is like you go super deep and you get like DynamoDB JSON document, and that's what you have to analyze. And you have like documentation for the support team that, I don't know, tells them how to do it. And like, that's all very horrible. But like, you don't build a tool in the middle because that would have been too much work. Like if they only needed once a quarter, right? And also the process that would even surface that it's like, that just doesn't get built, right? And so if they could just build themselves, that now you have this like situation where this thing gets built that just would have never been built in the other case.
Yeah, fully agree. There's definitely tools that we've built here that we just never would have even tried to build that if we didn't have like LLMs that we could inject into our scripts. To circle back to this idea of verticalization, the idea of like backend and front end developers kind of becoming one and becoming full stack engineers is an interesting idea. I've kind of been I have a blog article I wrote several years ago before GPT-4 even came out, GPT-4 came out, that was actually about like backend and DevOps roles merging. Because it was the trend that I saw at some of the companies that I worked at that were much more like almost like data engineering type of companies, where it was like the backend devs that really understood the infrastructure really well seemed to be getting just a ton done because we didn't have to go through like an IT team. But it's the exact same idea. It's like we've got these two different roles to work on the same thing. And one thing I wanted to talk with you about that I find very interesting is, okay, if you take this idea to its logical extreme, then it's just like, well, then the right thing to do is just have like one type of role called the knowledge worker. And the knowledge worker role does literally everything. And we just have like 50 of those people. And just like the amount of work that we need to get done just scales with the number of people we have, and just everybody does everything. That way, we never have to do handoffs, because the whole idea is like,
right.
In my mind, the friction between front end and back end developers is like, okay, like, please go develop these API endpoints so that like now I and my React app can like have access to those endpoints and I can make stuff happen. And you want to reduce the friction of those handoffs. So in my mind, that logical extreme doesn't actually make sense, because what you're really trying to do is limit the number of handoffs. And so you really want to like scope things down to where someone can kind of get all of their work done on like maybe at an individual ticket level without having to like wait on somebody else. How do you guys think about this almost from like a first principles perspective?
Yeah, I think what's missing from your reasoning, because I think I 100% agree, you could come to that conclusion, right? That basically you equalize people in a way, right? But I think the actual thing happening is the exact opposite. So it's that I can become more of an expert because I can actually concentrate more of the things that go kind of beyond what the LLM can do. Because those situations exist, but I also don't waste time doing the other stuff. And I don't waste process and so forth. And I think like if you just think about what is the world where I have my automated junior developer assistant, in that world, it actually frees up everyone else to become more of an expert. So I think it's actually, I agree on like basically you could think that there's equalization, but in fact, that part of the job actually gets automated and there's a specialization that really starts to shine.
I think that's true. I don't just think it's true. It's how I've been operating. I think it's anyone that's working with these tools, like that's how we're operating. We're always taking something that we feel like, I should be able to tab complete this in VS Code. I use Zed, the editor, but like it has a lot of the AI features similar to Cursor. I'll just throw like 5 files into the context window and just be like, hey, I just need these changed from like this format to this format. Or like this is all written in style X, I need it in style Y. Just stuff that like you don't need to be a senior engineer to know how to do. In fact, AI is really good at, but let's not waste our time there. But the reason I bring this up is because I feel like there's this other thing that's bothering me, which is like, it's not just true in my mind that you go, okay, we need full stack engineers instead of front end and back end, because I think the reasoning has to come back to this idea of scope. And the reason I say that is like, okay, I worked at this company where we had a front end team, a back end team, and we didn't really know what to call the other team because it was also backend, but it was more like data engineering. And they did their work within the context of just the data warehouse. There was really like, in some ways they serviced the UI because we needed to like surface data that eventually would be shown in the UI. But like really we were just getting all the data in the database into the right state and making sure that nothing was missing. And our work was very tightly scoped to that. And there would have never been any reason, like there never was any friction really between those two teams. Like no matter how many AI tools we had, I don't see us ever merging those roles. Whereas like the backend team dealing with like the CRUD APIs and the developers building the front end, it was like, yeah, there's a ton of friction there. We had to like merging those teams made a lot of sense. And so I'm curious like where companies will end up as maybe just roles shift and merge in ways that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. And, I would be lying to say I have all the answers. Like I think would be nice. But what we can do is concentrate on what is going to happen. We can remove friction and we can concentrate, friction also isn't bad, but so there's good friction and there's bad friction. And so we can concentrate on putting friction guides into places where they make a lot of sense because we don't want to ship slop. Yeah, it's definitely not a thing that should go away entirely. Yeah, I think with a data engineering team, I think they probably actually also want to like build a quick visualization tool for their data before then handing it off maybe to someone else to use. And now they still do the handoff, but they have previously validated with, and probably also with some other stakeholder, that this is the right data. It's not perfectly visualized in the way that you might eventually ship to end users or to like whatever the goal is, but it's like almost there. So it can like take away process steps there, even though eventually there is still a handoff. I think that's why I'm saying that, the experts are still needed, but you do the handoff when you want it rather than when you needed to do it, because there was no other way to do it. This is actually also like a framework design insight that, this is a random example, but like one of the things that I believe in is mixing data fetching with UI components. And we can't go in there. It's a controversial topic.
I've got a billion opinions and we don't have time for all of them.
In contrast to saying, okay, I have my data fetching code and eventually render it, right? Once you have the distributed data fetching system, you can use it, but it doesn't mean you have to use it. You can still put guardrails in there saying, okay, I do want to actually be very conscious about how I do it because I have waterfalls and it's all actually really complicated and needs to be done by experts. So I can put guardrails, but I put them because they're meaningful, not because my system was just fundamentally designed so that this thing was impossible. And I think that's really also how organizations sometimes work, where like you still want to talk to the expert for the things they're experts in, but it's great that you only have to do it when you actually need the expert versus, it was just easy and I did it myself.
Yeah, it's like artificial versus, I don't know, boundaries that exist in reality. There's a lot of artificial boundaries that don't need to exist. That makes sense to me.
Exactly.
Cool. This has been a lot of fun. I have like one last big topic that I want to cover before we wrap up. We've been going for an hour. This has been fun. And that is, okay, you're the CTO of Vercel. How many developers work at Vercel?
160-ish, 170 maybe.
160. Awesome. 170. When you hire new developers, has your hiring process changed any in the last couple of years due to AI? And if so, how?
Oh, that is a really good question. I don't think it has changed, and we're heavily hiring. Now, maybe I think productivity is up. I would say that if I hear in an interview that someone is like of the type who says, no, I would never use AI, that is a red flag to me.
Oh, yeah.
Not only like
me too.
You, by the way, you could have really good reasons for why maybe you're even right, or you maybe even right in the moment. But I think being open-minded is actually an important property of a person. And so not being stuck in your way, I think is a good field. I do actually, I mean, many of these problems that we have talked about are like real problems in our organization. As you were saying, like fundamentally we sell infrastructure. So we have all these infrastructure engineers, but the infrastructure needs to be productized. So if I deploy a bunch of routes to our CDN, I need a tool to view it, right? If I have our web application firewall, it needs to have a configuration interface. But none of these Go engineers know how to do it, right? And so that creates a lot of friction. Now I have to put like some TypeScript engineer in the team, and they don't really feel welcome because everyone around them writes Go. And so like in a very real fashion, like these things actually help us solve some of those problems. Fundamentally, I think we have always tried to hire more, experts with open-mindedness and breadth of knowledge. And so that certainly hasn't changed. So I would say maybe that's a boring answer, but fundamentally no big change.
Very interesting to hear that. And I love to hear it from somebody that's operating at the scale that you guys are operating. Thank you so much for coming on again. This has been a fun one. Do you want to go ahead and just plug? I mean, obviously we talked a lot about Vercel and V0, but I always just give guests the opportunity to plug anything they want to. Is there anything in particular, maybe locations of the things that we've talked about that you want to let people know about so they can go check them out?
Yeah, I mean, I think back engineering the audience, I think should give V0 a try. Actually see if it's true what I was babbling about. It's free, so you don't have to actually, give us money. Vercel overall has a big free tier. Like we believe in having developers be able to try things out. Obviously, once you all have jobs where your companies can then eventually, be our customers. So it's a really good model. Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd love for people to try things out. Technically, you can deploy Go to our platform. So it's not our main thing. Specializing in TypeScript and Python, but like, if you're adventurous, there's a lot of stuff out there. One thing we didn't touch about today is our new notion of fluid compute. So we're evolving on top of serverless, and I think that's in itself a really interesting thing. I'll publish really soon a blog post that dives into this topic a little bit more directly and not specific to our platform, because I think we, in quote, just discovered a pattern that mixes serverless and servers in a way that's maybe more actually just better in the long term than the extremes that we had so far, where you had to like have either or. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff going on in Vercel. And I'm always on X and LinkedIn, and everyone should feel free to just shoot me a DM or any type of public message, and I'm always available for questions and answers and whatever helps folks.
Malte, thanks for coming on. Talk to you later.
Thanks for having us. I really enjoyed the questions. Thank you very much.